Hello everyone, today I will tell you about the film Land of Bad. Enjoy watching! Before watching, please don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment. I'm trying to develop this channel and your support is the only thing I have. The squad is tasked with freeing an agent who was captured by a notorious arms dealer in the southern Philippines. Sergeant Kinney has little experience and is very nervous. At a military base in Las Vegas, Captain Grimm, call sign Ripper, is also worried because his favorite basketball team lost. For him, the operation will also begin in 15 minutes. The drone operator will provide air support. The soldiers at the base are constantly watching TV. Ripper asks them to listen to the phone. His wife is in her last month of pregnancy and can call at any time. Sergeant Kinney is a gunner. When things get hot, he will indicate the coordinates and request a bombing. The gunner admitted that today is his first combat mission. The other soldiers are not happy about this. It is time to parachute. Kinney panicked and could not open his parachute for a long time. But everything worked out. Now they need to get to the target. Their movements will be monitored from the air by Ripper and his partner, Staff Sergeant Branson. The guy got to them by accident. He missed the train because of diarrhea, and the authorities decided that the gunner would be useful on this mission. So he ended up in the company of the elite Delta Squad. 3 kilometers from the target, they noticed some movement and asked the operators to check what was there. The gunner received a picture. The drone sees them. But unfortunately, the electronics failed, and it was not possible to check the territory ahead. The drone will have to be returned to the base for repairs. And they do not have another one, so they will need to clear the area. The squad moved forward and almost shot a pig running past. The special forces reached the base. The commander ordered the military to take positions, study the terrain and the number of enemies. Bishop saw the main one in the sight, the arms dealer Pereira with his family. The soldiers at headquarters turned off the ringer on their phones so it wouldn't interfere with their basketball game. Several cars with Abu Sayyaf rebels arrived at the base, an armed Islamist group that operates in the Philippines. Syed Hashimi, the head of Abu Sayyaf, came to see Pereira. The drone was finally fixed. The gunner transmitted the coordinates, and Reaper discovered the enemy base. Apparently, the terrorists had come here to buy weapons. Suddenly, Hashimi pulled out a pistol and shot Pereira. A shootout began. The militants shot all the guards. In front of Pereira, Hashimi chopped off his wife's head. They dragged his son to him to execute him. The military decided they had to act. Ripper locked onto the target and fired a missile. There were 30 seconds until impact. That's a long time. So Sergeant Abel opened fire and wounded Hashimi in the leg. At that moment, the missile hit the house. During the explosion, the boy managed to escape with his nanny. Kinney took a less than ideal position above the entrance to the cave. One of them had already smelled the soldier. But the Filipinos were already in the crosshairs, and all 3 were eliminated at the same time. However, they managed to throw a grenade at Kinney, and he fell from his position down. The fighters began to be surrounded from all sides. A serious massacre began. Sniper Bishop ran closer to his comrades to cover them. Soon, squad leader Abel was seriously wounded. Another car drove up to the base. An RPG fighter got out of it and fired at the squad. Abel received another wound. The gunner managed to cover him, but there was no point in it. A few seconds later, Abel died. Kinney needed to pull himself together and give Reaper the coordinates of the grenade launcher. The operator found the target and launched the rocket. Unfortunately, while it was flying, the grenade launcher made another accurate shot. Sugar and Bishop were unlucky. Kinney also had a hard time. The gunner was spotted and opened fire on him with a machine gun. Kinney slid off the cliff and hid among the trees. The gunner reported that the entire squad had fallen in battle and asked to scan the area. Ripper reported that everything was clear and he could move to the evacuation site. But Kinney panicked and froze in place. Ripper yelled at the guy and only then did he move forward. The helicopter landing zone was 5 kilometers away. Suddenly, militants began to surround him from all sides. The sergeant hid, hoping to wait it out. However, several Filipinos drove up there with a dog. The dog found the American and began to bark. The enemy came very close. But the animal lost interest in Kinney and returned to its owner. Ripper reported that the area was clear. There was still 1 more kilometer to go to the landing zone. Ripper tries to distract the guy with conversations about pizza and basketball. Finally, Kinney reached the evacuation zone. The helicopter would arrive in 3 minutes. The pilot saw his fighter and began to descend. At that moment, they started shooting at Kinney, but his bulletproof vest saved him. The enemy was pulling forces here, and the machine gunner opened fire on them. But when they started shooting back at the helicopter with RPGs, the pilot realized it was time to get out. The gunner watched the helicopter and ran forward. Only the Reaper could help him now. The operator fired the last missile at the enemy. 20 seconds and the militant squad was eliminated along with the vehicles. However, Kinney did not feel any better. He continued to be fired at from all sides. The Reaper was empty, but a bomber flew in and hit a large area with missiles. The gunner asked the pilot to go around again. He was still in the kill zone, but the sergeant had no choice. Having used up his ammunition, the pilot returned to base. Ripper reported that at first glance, everything was clear, but perhaps the enemy was simply hiding better now. There was another landing zone. It was 2 kilometers from Kinney. In addition, they would have to overcome a hill. The tired sergeant went forward. He stumbled and fell into the river. Sergeant Branson noticed 3 enemies ahead. Kinney urgently needed to find cover, but his rifle was left above. The sergeant began to shoot back with a pistol. Then they had to fall from a waterfall and hide in the water among the rocks. Kinney continued moving downstream, but he was still spotted and captured. Ripper reported the situation to the colonel and asked him to stay in his chair to continue the operation. Kinney was tied up and left in some hut. It turned out that Sergeant Sugar had survived. He shot Kinney's guards and freed him. Now he is going to free Sniper Bishop and hope that the young fighter will help him. Sugar found a weapons cache and, having collected all the supplies, headed to the Abu Sayyaf camp. Kinney built an antenna from an empty bottle and a couple of wires. He climbed up the rock and contacted Ripper. The sergeant said that they were returning for their own. They would need a bomber to destroy the enemy base. The gunner selected the coordinates where the bombs would be dropped. 3 bombings would be carried out at intervals of 15 minutes. The first 2 attacks would distract attention. The last one would destroy the terrorists' caves. The colonel demands that Ripper go home. He has already worked 10 hours. The man resisted to the last, but the colonel switched to threats, and Ripper was forced to obey. Sugar counted the number of enemies and instructed the fighter. With 12 minutes left before the first strike, the operatives went on the attack. Having run to the tent, Sugar killed the enemy with a pistol. Then the fighters entered Pereira's mansion. Sugar wanted to kill them quietly, but the plan failed. Nevertheless, the comrades had to act hand to hand. The enemies were eliminated, but reinforcements came running to the noise. Having dealt with them, the fighters left the house, and they shot at the car with the terrorists with machine guns. Militants came running from all sides. Sugar was wounded in the side, and an unarmed Filipino attacked Kinney and almost finished off the sergeant with his own pistol. But Sugar saved the guy. The fight ended when the Americans were pelted with grenades. The prisoners were beaten and thrown into cages. The plan to save Bishop failed. The gunner started yelling that bombs would be dropped on the caves. They would all be finished if they did not get out. Sugar was given no help. He was bleeding and was about to die. Hashimi did not wait for this and shot Sugar in the head himself. The cave shook after the first explosion. Kinney was pulled out of the cage next. He was severely beaten and sat on a chair. Hashimi chooses a tool with which to torture the prisoner. The choice fell on a hammer and a machete. Kinney continues to talk about bombs, but the boss does not believe him. He took a hammer and knocked out the sergeant's teeth. Then the henchman began to drown the gunner. Hashimi wants to find out where the others are hiding. He did not listen to the sergeant, who kept talking about bombs. Kinney was thrown into the bathtub to drown him. At this moment, the operator dropped several bombs. The cave was engulfed in fire, which burned the terrorists. Kinney managed to survive, because at that moment he was underwater. Now they need to find a way out. Kinney grabbed a machete and went forward. He found another prisoner in a cage. This is the same agent they were supposed to save. The sergeant dragged him along. In another room with cages, Hashimi was lying. He was having fun until he noticed machete in the American's hands. Kinney pierced him through and then finished him off with a rock. The sergeant freed Sniper Bishop from the cage. There were 6 minutes left until the final strike. A bomber was flying here for this purpose. The gunner grabbed Hoshimi's satellite phone to contact Reaper and cancel the final strike. However, everyone at headquarters was watching basketball. The private replied that Reaper was no longer there and dictated his cell phone number, then hung up. Kinney called Reaper, who was at the supermarket at the time. He was consulting with his wife, so he simply dropped an unknown number. He was cut off at the checkout, and he decided to listen to the voice message. Hearing about the cancellation, Ripper immediately went to headquarters. He also tries to call his own people, but no one picks up. Ripper drove into the hangar. The survivors realized they needed to escape and ran towards the exit. They saw the plane, but it flew past because Ripper yelled "cancel" to the pilot at the last second. He pointed out to his colleague an operative who was in the kill zone. Kinney still managed to survive. Ripper heard screams coming from the break room. He approached the military and said that he called 5 times, but in the end, the phone was simply disconnected. Because of their stupidity, they almost killed 3 operatives. This is where the film ends.